project?
I thought it was perfect, honestly. I love the calendar.
Well, thank you.
Yes, I mean, it's full of explanation. It's easy to read. It's big. It's
Yes.
sturdy.
Yes.
And obviously, so much work has been put on that, more than any other calendar I've ever seen.
Yeah. Well, okay, super. So we see who's on here now.
We'll take a look. I'm going to see if Allison's on here, and she's not.
No, not yet.
But I'm going to welcome all you that are on here tonight. Got Abiyahu Ben Zion. How are you doing, Abiyahu? I haven't heard from you for a while.
Yeah, I'm doing good. I actually just wanted to let you know that I won't be attending this meeting. I have my uncle Daniel Ben Zion filling in my place for me, so he'll be filling in for me.
So you're not going to be here?
No, but my uncle will be. My uncle, he's right next to me. He's on the meeting, so he's gonna fill in for me. So
you know what this is about tonight?
Yeah, it's about Shaul, is what I hear.
Yeah, I'm not so sure myself. I guess we ought to start with Shaul after a little bit of introduction, but I have just had a lot of fun preparing this the last few days, and I've had a lot of fun with a Microsoft product called OneNote.
Yeah.
Anybody
I
use
use it
it?
a lot at work, so.
Yeah, you can paste pictures in it, move them around, and text and everything else. I'm not a power user, but it's pretty much fun. And I just got carried away with pictures tonight, and I think that's what I want to show you the first. Some pictures I put together. Let me share my screen. As soon as, once again, I find, here it is. I find my pictures. I think in this meeting and tomorrow, we're going to talk about Paul in Rome, primarily Rome, but I hope to give you some information about Paul, since there's been so much floating around here lately that makes sense and kind of rounds out Paul's secular life. So few people know that. They only know Paul from his letters, rather than from anybody else. Or there's not much in secular history, but there is some. And what is there is intriguing and in some cases shocking. But here we have a picture gallery for tonight. These are some of the people I want to talk about. Look at them. Canonization of two popes, April 2014. There's John and Paul. John Paul, and that's Pope John, right? 23rd. First one up, we have a very chaste picture of Valeria Messalina. In Roman history, she was the second wife of the Emperor Claudius, whom is mentioned in Acts at least one time, maybe twice. And Valeria Messalina was a notorious person in Rome and throughout the world at the first century. If you got a mic on, would you mute it, please? Okay. And I just want you to see a picture so we can, when we talk about her life a little bit, you'll get an idea what she looks like. That is a very almost iconic picture of Messalina. Here's what she probably looked like, the second picture. Most probably that was the way she usually was when you hear a little story about her. Messalina is, by a number of scholars, thought to be the object of John's description of the whore of Babylon. And if I can move this around a little bit. Let me go over to another page because I wanted to read a little bit from Revelation here. He said, I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names. It had 7 heads and 10 horns. I think I got it there. The woman was clothed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her fornication. And on her forehead was written a name, a mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of whores and of earth's abominations. Note, the beast, of course, is a composite of 2 cities. In fact, it tells us who the beast is. Of course, it's Rome, but it's also a composite of Jerusalem. Messalina's picture was well known in the 1st century. She came into the life of the empire in the middle of the century, and her portrait was on coins, the same kind of coins you needed to pay the tax. So everybody knew who she was. Why was she on coins? Well, first of all, she's sitting on the beast, wearing purple and scarlet. Those are the colors of the empire, purple especially, the Roman Empire. We still have purple shirts today to represent bishops in the church. She's full of jewels and pearls. She's very rich, as Messalina was. She used her influence, every possibility to gain money. Cup full of abominations and impurities, well, of her fornication. Well, we'll talk about that in just a little bit, because she may well be the most well-known fornicator that ever lived. I mean, maybe not well-known today, but prolifically. And with that, I'll just add that she was the Emperor Claudius's wife, his first wife, and his first cousin. And she's the mother of whores and of the earth's abomination. And certainly that was true of her. Back to the pictures. Yes, these are 2 representatives of Messalina here. And if you look her up on the internet and click images, you'll see a lot worse than this, believe me. And some that go back to the 1st century of her in different positions of fornication. This is the Emperor Claudius in this picture. He's the deified Claudius. When Claudius became a god represented by Jupiter. This is the same fellow that is mentioned in the scripture, especially concerning dates. Same one that sent envoys down to Rome, or to Jerusalem and to Syria to interview the Apostle Paul. And some might say that Paul actually visited this Caesar. Now, he was unlikely Caesar because Claudius, first of all, he was handicapped. Second of all, he had a terrible stutter. And so he played the part in his family of being retarded. He played the part to stay out of the intrigues of government and to stay out of the many murders, executions of family members that were vying for the emperorship or for money. So he just hid out. When his nephew, who was the emperor, that is Caligula, was eliminated by the Praetorian Guard, the Praetorians usually chose the next emperor. Now, Praetorians were German soldiers, mercenaries that were brought down to protect emperors. So they couldn't trust the Romans to do that, so they brought Germans in. And the Praetorians, when they killed Caligula, went looking for the next emperor. And Claudius was in his bedroom, hiding behind a curtain. He didn't want that honor, but he was actually next in line. In fact, they skipped his line because obviously he was retarded. But the Praetorians found him behind the curtain and brought him out, and he was sure he was going to be executed, but instead of that, they brought him out as the emperor and lifted him up there before the people. And he began to get confidence. And all of a sudden, his retardation went away, and he spoke eloquently to the people to convince them that, yes, he should be the emperor. He got some courage there from the Praetorians. Here he is. Remember, these icons, these statues are, as I mentioned, iconic. That is, it's the best they can possibly look. Same way with icons in the Greek church or Roman church. Icons are used to portray people as they are deified. That is to say, in the Christian tradition, an icon is used to show a person in their resurrected or spiritual form. That's why icons are so beautiful and perfect. And understand that the governor went to a Greek Orthodox church to a wedding a week or two ago, and he was able to go into a Greek Orthodox church. And if you are able to, please do, because inside, you might consider it blasphemous, but inside, they are thought to be the very home of God to them. So they adorn the home beautifully. Inside a Greek Orthodox church, you can just be amazed, not only at the way they adorn it with icons and statues and stained glass windows and everything you can imagine, and the most expensive you can imagine, but their services are very dance-like. And governor said the marriage service he went to was in 3 different languages. I just bring that up because it has a connection with Rome, and that is to say that the Roman Catholic Church and the Greek Church in the ancient days did follow the very ways that the emperor and senate did their religious services as well. Even the colors come down to us today from the Roman emperor. Next we have, this is Poppaea Sabina. Beautiful lady. Another picture of her. It's very stylized. And this is Nero, of course. Nero was Claudius' step-uncle. And he came to power after Claudius was executed by Messalina through the eating of a poison mushroom. So along comes Nero. We started out pretty good. He had his first wife killed for adultery. Her name was Octavia. And he took on this well-known beauty, Poppaea Sabinus. And Poppaea might sound similar to you, or because of the place called Pompeii. That's where her family came from, and even at this time owned a lot of land there. Poppaea was a very worldly woman, very much sought after, but Nero as emperor, he wasn't so good looking now, was he? And he was pretty well nuts, probably from lead poisoning. But the women such as these were drawn to power. And Nero had the power, and he wanted her, and he got her. They were actually happy for a while, but their first child was born dead. The second child that came, Nero, in a rage, kicked her to death, killed her and the child as well. We are told in some traditions that Poppaea was on the verge of converting to Nazarene Judaism at this time, the time of her death. And that may well be correct. Nero went on to marry again. The next person he married was right here, Sporus, a boy that supposedly looked exactly like Poppaea. He missed her so much that, but he was attracted more to men and boys than women. So he found himself this boy, Sporus, who he married and dressed him up like Poppaea. Then after Sporus, he married a gladiator before he was assassinated, or I should say, took his own life if he did indeed die in 68 AD. Below him is a name that you should recognize. It's a freedman of Nero, that is, an ex-slave who gained his freedom if he would work for Nero the rest of his life. His name is Epaphroditus. You read about him in Philippians, I think it's chapter 2 or maybe 4. You could correct me. Epaphroditus is the one to whom Josephus dedicated his books to, or I should say his vita, his life story, his biography. Here he is, biblical figure, Epaphroditus. He's also called Epaphras in the scripture. He was a secretary. You can see him with books here. Prolific writer. And he went on to serve 3 more emperors, Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian. And Domitian finally had him executed for his supposed conversion to a foreign superstition. Here's the main guy I wanted to talk about tonight, if I have time. This handsome fellow here is Seneca. Seneca was a Stoic philosopher. He was banished to the Isle of Corsica by by Claudius. But Nero's mother brought him back on one condition, that he would serve as the tutor and the strategist for her son, Domitian Ahenobarbus Nero. So Seneca is quite well known today, and he's actually having a pretty good revival of his work. Seneca, though, being a Stoic, think of a Stoic when you think of Mr. Spock on Star Trek, or a Vulcan. That's the Stoic philosophy. Live minimalized, do good works, think good thoughts, be a good Samaritan at all times. But in his personal life, he was far from that. He was the richest man in the Roman Empire, for one thing. Second of all, when Claudius had subdued the Brits, Seneca stole their property in Britain, the property of many individuals, including Boudica, if you've ever heard of her, stole it out from under the Brits and resold it and made fortunes. So he might have preached poverty, chastity, good works, but he did not practice them. Down here we've got Agrippina. This is Nero's mother. Nero had his first wife executed for adultery, though she hardly seemed the type. He really had her executed because she was not able to bear. So he sent her out to an island, Pandataria, a very horrible place to be exiled to, brought her back, talked with Seneca and his other advisor, Burrus, and decided that Octavia must go. So she was executed for adultery. Then Nero took on Poppaea, as I mentioned before. This is the mother. I'm sorry, I said it was Octavia. This is Agrippina, his mother, not his first wife. So Nero had her killed too. He was called the matricide. He bought her a birthday present of a boat, and he had the boat rigged so that under the curtain on the boat, where you can get some shade in the heat, it was rigged so that after a while, if there was weight laying upon it, the lead cover would fall down on anybody who was resting there in the shade. Yes, the lead cover. Well, the lead cover killed Agrippina's slave, but knocked her off the boat. So she came swimming to shore while Nero had the Navy watch her, and then had the Navy cut her down when she reached the shore. And that was her birthday. So he had his wife and his mother executed. He murdered his second wife, and his third and fourth wives were men. There's so many tales we could tell about him. But he is the emperor to whom some historians tell us that Paul had to argue his case before. And this, of course, this is the earliest portrait of St. Paul that I think we have. You can tell what era it comes from because it's in mosaic. The Hellenist Christians didn't believe in doing icons at this time, though they certainly do now. What they could do instead is take little pieces of stone, individual pieces, and make an icon. And that wouldn't be breaking the commandment, according to them. So here's the earliest version of Paul. He looks like an Idumean quite a bit, an Arab. And we'll talk about his genealogy here in a minute. So is there anybody else on here? It's hard to keep these people straight. There are a lot more, but these people have to do with what I'm going to talk about today and tomorrow. Because the mystery is history. But first, I want to take a look at chat. There's gobs of chat here. How can that be? You want to link to something. I don't know what. These pictures? Or my text? There's a lot of text. I don't have them up yet. Yes, the Greek literatures are very elaborate, and as you said, in several languages at once. And it's almost like the priests there are dancing around. And they've got so much stuff up there in the sacristy that you wonder how they can dance around there so well without knocking something over. In fact, my wife and I were touring one of these churches during a Greek festival. So many of these Greek Orthodox churches have festivals in the spring or summer where you can actually go in and tour the church, and they will sell you baklava, and they'll have a band playing, and you can drink beer and stuff like that. If you have a chance, go just to see what's inside. Well, my wife was up on the sacristy, and she did knock a statue down. She almost fell down herself. There was a step there that she didn't see, and down she went, and the statue too. Nero, well, one word really describes Nero, and that was that he was omnivorous. Everything, anything, anywhere, and couldn't get enough of it. Actually, Nero, for a pastime, what he would do, he'd dress up like a hood and get himself together a gang of hoods. Then he would go out for fun, like a trick-or-treater, and murder people, or rob people and beat them up, or do rape. This is what he did for a pastime. Some of the other things that he did, we're thinking that they're historical because legitimate historians write about them. The easiest and most fun read about the emperors is Suetonius, the 12 Caesars. It's a tiny little book. You can probably get it for a penny. But if you're interested in history at all, in this kind of history, you'll find it very entertaining. And the Roman era, I don't think it's as bad as today. It's just that the emperor had so much power. You see, before the emperors came in at the beginning of the first century, it was a republic. It had the same kind of government as we do, a democratic republic. And everybody had a representative just like we do. But the government got so bad, and the government people became so greedy for themselves and working government for themselves that finally Rome was ready to collapse, and they needed one strong ruler. After Julius Caesar, Caesar was stabbed 1,000,000 times in the Senate and occasioned that famous line, "Et tu, Bruti?" Famous that occasion, "You too, Brutus?" Anyway, it left such a power vacuum because Caesar had so much power that once he got done with, his heir, that is Augustus or Octavian Caesar, had to fight it out with Mark Antony and several other generals, but he won the power. And by the time he got finished after a reign of 40, 50 years, he'd done so much good that they decided to make a dynasty out of it. And this is where we get in the New Testament, in the reign of Caesar Augustus. There were many called Nero, and Nero wasn't this guy's name anyway. His name was Domitian Ahenobarbus, and he took the name Nero. He was Caligula's nephew. And Ahenobarbus, I think that means Redbeard. You might want to look that up if you really want silly little facts. Heard that Paul and Nero could well be. And that would be Poppaea Sabina, if that were possible. Because as I said, she found herself there in Rome, a rabbi of some kind. The only one I can think of that would be that close to the empire would be Paul. Think, Paul's in Rome for a couple of years and then Acts breaks off. It doesn't tell anything about his martyrdom. I don't think he was martyred. I think he went on tour to Britain. There's a passage called the Cennini manuscript that was found in Constantinople that describes Paul's whereabouts after Rome, that he went to Spain, he went to Gaul, Britain, Londinium. He came back through Deutschland down to Helvetia, that is Switzerland. Something happened to him in Switzerland. And that he was taken by the same cadre of soldiers that were put in charge of him in Jerusalem. And he was taken around to preach from military outpost to military outpost. How else could he do it? Paul has in the Cennini manuscript several little speeches, one concerning Pontius Pilate. It's quite interesting. He gives a sermon from Mount Lude, which I think is in Switzerland. Anyway, if you want to read the Cennini manuscript, I have it in my H.T. Anderson Sinaitic translation of the New Testament. Or just ask me for it. I'm sure that I have out at JS Presents. I'm sure that I've read it off. St. Augustine Basilica. I don't know where it's from. I've seen it many times. Well, see, what finally happened to Nero, supposedly, and we read this in Tacitus, the historian. Tacitus and Suetonius, Dio Cassius. If you like to listen while you're sleeping, you can download all this stuff for free. To me, it's so entertaining. Honest to goodness. I can't even sleep listening to it anymore. I'm so engrossed in hearing it because it has so much to do with the New Testament. You can download those from LibriVox.org if you want them. They all describe, all three of those, and there are a few more too, describe these emperors and what they did out in the provinces and about the Holy Land as well, from their perspective. In fact, Tacitus has history of the Jews. It's very interesting. He was a heathen, pagan historian, and I think there on my site too, I have a download of what Tacitus says about the origin of the Jews. You should hear that. Entertaining, I'd say, after we have heard so much other stuff about the origins. All right. So let's see, where was I? We wanted to talk about Paul a little bit, I guess. The object of this whole thing is to get to the letters between Paul and Seneca. What we find in this series of letters, of course, didn't make the canon of Scripture because they're not that religious. Of course, they have also been decried as false, but these aren't false letters. Paul and Seneca wrote to each other, I think 8 letters over the course of several years, and the letters are actually dated. And they don't make any sense really unless you know what's going on in those dates in history. And if you do and read them, you'll come to an astonishing conclusion. I guess I could just go right there. See, I should have it on here. I found an article too about Paul before Nero. It's very good. Let's see. Paul's first trial before Nero. Somebody takes the New Testament, especially the late books, and they're able to dig out of them through historical critical method some of the quotes from Paul's trial. Pretty convincing. I've got Seneca quotes here too. Let's talk about Saulos Thaddeus Alexander Herod. I mentioned him in my post on Facebook. Let me just read a little bit from, actually I got this on Genie. It's a site for genealogy. And I ran across this by accident. Saulos is mentioned, of course, in Josephus numerous times. And actually in connection with the death of James. I think last Friday night, Brad indicated that he was suspicious about Paul being involved in the death of James, and it may well be when we look at that. He's mentioned by the Jewish historian Josephus in the Jewish War and in the Antiquities, both. Saulos reported the Roman reverses in Jerusalem to the Emperor Nero in Corinth. Nero at that time, the beginning of the war, was touring Greece as an actor and as a singer. Which resulted in the dispatch of Vespasian from Britain. So what's happening here is Saul is down there in Jerusalem, and he's talking about the attempt to enter the walls of Jerusalem by the Roman general Castius of the 10th Legion Fretensis. They were able to come across from Syria and bring their troops together from the various outposts in Syria and Palestine, gathered together for a surrounding of Jerusalem. The order from Nero was to get in there and take the city over completely. They were not able to do that. Something spooked the general there. They had plenty of troops. This was before the war proper. This is at the very beginning of the Jewish revolt. Castius, the general, brought them, actually entered Jerusalem. But for some reason, nobody knows, not even the historians, he left. It might have been supernatural. And I think that's in about 66, 67. And Castius took his legions and made for Caesarea. That was the Roman headquarters at that time. And as they moved up the coast to Caesarea, the Zealots and the Sicarii picked them off. Through guerrilla warfare, picked off all of the legion of the Romans as they moved up to their headquarters, till about the only ones left were Castius and his guard. Made it up there. It was a terrible defeat for Rome. It was, in the world, a terrible embarrassment for Nero. And he was bound and determined to take care of that problem. You see, a generation before, Caligula had sent his image to be set up in the temple in Jerusalem. And as the Jews were trying to dissuade his counselor, Petronius, that brought the statue down, to dissuade him from doing so, they were only able to postpone it for a while, to the point where when Petronius said, we're going to have to do this even if we're going to have to kill you all, the Jews there that had come from every quarter in the Jewish world to represent the temple, they got on their knees, put their heads back, and they bared their necks. So Petronius takes one more try with Caligula, and he writes to Caligula one more time. And after he sends the message, Caligula writes his reply, but before it's mailed, Caligula is assassinated. Just at that very time. So, of course, the Jews call that the invincibility of Yahweh, at least the religious ones. And then after that is the affair with Castius. So you can understand why the Jewish leaders of Jerusalem, who were at this time primarily robber bandits, they would think they were invincible. They would think that the power from the temple would gain the victory over any enemy after that. So now we have Saulos reporting those things to Nero in Corinth. Then we have, in the New Testament, Saul Paul's nephew warning the Romans of that plot to kill him, which was probably a setup from the elders of the assembly. A close reading of Acts 21 gives you an idea that it's a setup. And I'm kind of thinking if it was probably in revenge for Paul throwing James down the temple steps earlier that we read in the Acts. This nephew is unnamed in the New Testament, but Paul did have a nephew, and his name is Julius Alexander. Julius Alexander, the nephew of Saulos, is famous for one thing, and he's written up in Josephus himself, that is, for purchasing the first copy of the Jewish War from Josephus himself. Julius Alexander Archelaus. Note the Archelaus, which is a Herodian name. Paul's sister, having the same name as his mother, Cypros, it's a Cypriot name, whereas the last name of Paul's father is a Herodian name. And I'll get his father's name in just a minute. Yes, got it. It's Antipater Alexander Herod. And he's the grandson of Herod the Great's sister Salome. And there's so much we could talk about here that we could go on forever, I think. Here's a quote from the Jewish War. And as they said these things, they produced those priests that were skillful in the customs of their country, who made the report that all their forefathers had received the sacrifices from foreign nations, but still not one of the innovators, understand that's Josephus' term for zealots and Sicarii, murderers. Not one of the innovators would hearken to what was said. Nay, those that ministered about the temple would not attend their divine service, but were preparing matters for the beginning of war. So the men of power, perceiving that the sedition was too hard for them to subdue, and that the danger that would arise from the Romans would come upon them first of all, they endeavored to save themselves and sent ambassadors, some to Florus. Florus was the successor to Pontius Pilate after Felix and Festus. Felix, Festus, and Florus, governors of Syria. Palestine was part of Syria at that time. And as I like to mention, these three bloodthirsty governors, two of which are mentioned in the New Testament in Acts. Felix means happy, Festus means festive, and Florus means flowery. What names for government, bureaucratic thieves and killers. So the chief of which was son of Ananias named Simon. Simon, the son of Ananias. He was the head of the temple. And others were sent to Agrippa, among whom the most eminent were Saul and Antipas and Costobarus, who were of the king's kindred. So Saul is named there. Antipas was probably his father, and Costobarus was his brother. I looked up these names some time ago. It's quite illuminating as to where those names came from, especially Costobarus. Sounds like a Greek name. Isn't it funny, too, that Paul has a traveling companion named Barnabas, and we've got his brother named Bar Costa. And a little more from the war. After this calamity had befallen Castius, I told you what it was, many of the most eminent of the Jews swam away from the city as from a ship when it's going to sink, rats off a ship. Costobarus, therefore, and Saul, who were brothers, together with Philip, the son of Iachimus, or James, who was the commander of King Agrippa's forces, ran away from the city and went to Castius. That's again the Roman general that escaped up to Caesarea. But then how Antipas, who had been besieged with them in the king's palace, would not fly away with them, was afterwards slain by the seditious, as we shall relate hereafter. However, Castius sent Saul and his friends at their own desire to Achaia, that's Greece, to Nero, who was in Greece, to inform him of the great distress they were in and to lay the blame of their kindling the war upon Florus, the governor, Mr. Flowery, as hoping to alleviate his own anger by provoking his indignation against Florus rather than them. Hold just a moment. I got an open mic here. Am I boring you? That's closed.
No.
Okay. Here's another quote from the Antiquities. And this is an important quote, more important than the others. But I will say the others show this Saulos to be just what we might suspect, a Roman agent. And this action here was shortly after Paul supposedly died in the Neronic persecution. When I tell you more, I think you'll find with me that his death just didn't happen. This is from the Antiquities, written in 94. Previous to this quote, we have the account of James the Just being stoned. Immediately after that account, we have this. Costobarus also and Saul did themselves get together a multitude of wicked wretches, and this because they were of the royal family. And so they obtained favor among them because of their kindred to Agrippa. But still they used violence with the people and were very ready to plunder those that were weaker than themselves. And from that time, it principally came to pass that our city was greatly disordered and that all things grew worse and worse among us. So if we're talking about Paul here, then this is what Brad mentioned the other night. There's an implication here that Paul, was somehow implicated in the death of James because of the paragraph before. Now, I want you to understand, I am not anti-Paul. I'm pro-Paul. But just like any other apostle or historical figure, you can get one idea of who they are by reading their writings. And as we know, a couple of Paul's books, especially 2 Corinthians and Galatians, are full of him talking about his boasting. And certainly in Romans, we have a tie to the Herodian family. And we have a tie to Nero's freedman, Epaphroditus. And we have actually a tie here to Josephus too. This happened in Josephus' lifetime. Josephus at this time was a general for the Jewish cause in Galilee. But you know the story. He was a turncoat to save his own life. He killed 40 people, or should I say, he maneuvered 40 people into killing each other, and then became a confessor to Vespasian the general. I think that there is definitely collusion here. And if Paul went to Rome on trial, he made his claim to speak to the emperor. And if he did, oh, what else? He was in Rome for 2 years or so, at least, that we know of. What emperor would it be? Because of his Herodian ties and because of his friendship with Epaphroditus and probably several more, why wouldn't he be talking to Nero, talking to Poppaea? I think the greatest kettle of fish here that we have are, again, these letters between Paul and Seneca. I'm going to find them right now. Hold on. And I'll end up with them. Then we'll do this again maybe tomorrow. See how you find something on here. I've just started using this program. I mean, seriously using it. Oh, I can't find it. Let me go out here. I tell you, I have so many hard drives and so much information, and my hard drive on my computer here is almost full up, and I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 external drives. One's 3 terabytes, and it's almost full up. Information overload. Saulos Thaddeus Alexander Herod, the full name. Now remember about Seneca. I should really read you some of his quotes first, but we'll skip that for now. Seneca was the best-known Stoic philosopher in the world at this time. He was also the richest man in the world. And he gained a lot of those riches through his association with Nero. And he started with Nero when Nero was a young lad, probably teenager, early teenager. And he was the tutor and advisor up to the end of Nero's reign in 68 AD. Except right before Nero's reign was over, Seneca wanted to retire to his gardens. He was a well-known gardener. He had property everywhere. Finally, at his age, you saw what he looked like there in this statue. They didn't do him a very good job, I think, but he was elderly. He wanted to retire. He'd probably seen so many people murdered that were close to the emperor that he probably figured he was next. And Nero was very kind to him and pointed out how much money Seneca had made during the times of their intercourse. I probably mean that in 2 ways. Pointed that out. And Nero wanted him to stay. His other tutor mentor, whose name was Burrus, had recently died. And the authors of biographies about Nero wonder today regarding Seneca, if Seneca, the great old Stoic, had any influence on Nero to cause what was first a good administration to become so rotten. So Nero gave Seneca an order, and that is, kindly go home and slit your wrists. This was the customary way for politicians to end their lives at that time. There's a sad, sad commentary on Seneca's death. It said his blood was so stiff and so thick that he cut his wrists and he couldn't bleed out. He got himself a bunch of friends there to witness his death, as again was customary, and got in the hot bath to let his blood out. And what should have been a very quiet, peaceful death turned into a horror of a death and a torture for him, ostensibly because probably his veins were so full of mercury and lead. But Mrs. Seneca also cut her wrists and got in the bath. Not to say they got in the bath together. I don't know about that. But Nero intervened when he heard this, and he had the Praetorians go and take Mrs. Seneca out of the bath and bind her up to live longer. This correspondence is mentioned by Jerome, and it actually led Jerome to put this in his catalog of Christian authors and literary works. Also, Augustine and a few other Christian writers considered it canon and authentic. A cursory reading, it doesn't seem authentic, again, unless you know what is going on in these dates. Let me read it, and then I'll come to a conclusion for tonight. Seneca to Paul, greetings. I believe, Paul, that you have been informed of the talk that I had yesterday with my Lucilius about the Apocrypha, or possibly the secret mysteries and other things. For certain sharers in your teaching were with me. There's no reason to doubt that. For we had retired to the gardens of Sallust, where, because of us, those whom I speak of, going in another direction, saw and joined us. I guess we would call that today a Bible study, although, of course, at that time, there was no Bible like that. Certainly, we wished for your presence, and I would have you know it. We were much refreshed by the reading of your book, by which I mean some of the many letters that you have addressed to some city or capital of a province and which inculcate the moral life with admirable precepts. These thoughts, I take it, are not uttered by you, but through you. But surely sometimes both by you and through you, for such is the greatness of them, and they are instinct, that is warm, with such nobility, that I think whole generations of men could hardly suffice for the instilling and perfecting of them. I desire your good health, sir, brother. Paul writes back, I received your letter yesterday with delight and should have been able to answer it at once. Had I had by me the youth I meant to send to you, for you know when and by whom and at what moment and to whom things ought to be given and entrusted. I beg, therefore, that you will not think yourself neglected when I am respecting the dignity of your person. Now, in that you somewhere write that you are pleased with my letter, or write that you are pleased with part of my letter, I think myself happy in the good opinion of such a man as you. For you would not say it, you, a critic, a sophist, the teacher of a great prince, and indeed of all, unless you spoke truth. I trust you may be long in health. A very benign letter, but you see, the prince is now mentioned, that is Nero, and spoken of with a good opinion. Seneca writes to Paul, "Greeting. I've arranged some writings in a volume and given them their proper divisions. I am also resolved to read them to Caesar," Nero, "if only fortune be kind, that he may bring a new and interested ear to the hearing. Perhaps you too will be there. If not, I will at another time fix you a day, that we may look over the work together. Indeed, I couldn't produce this writing to him without first conferring with you. If only that could be done without risk, that you may know that you are not being neglected. Farewell, dearest Paul." You get the drift there? Seneca is asking, perhaps, to engage the mind of Nero in good and decent things, if he might share with Nero those letters of Paul. And he'll mention which ones pretty soon. Paul to Seneca. "Greeting. Whenever I hear your letters read, I think of you as present and imagine nothing else but you're always with us. As soon then as you begin to come, we shall see each other at close quarters. I desire your good health." Paul's always pretty short in these letters. Seneca to Paul. Remember, these were written over a course of years, not just one after the other. "We are much pained by your retirement. What is it that causes, what causes keep you away? If it be the anger of the lady, because you have left the old rite and sect and have converted others, or there will be a possibility of pleading with her that she may consider it as done on due reflection and not lightly." Who's the lady here? That lady is Poppaea, Nero's wife at that time, who, didn't I say, is known by historians through something that she was a convert to Judaism. And here Seneca is mentioning that she's angry with him because he left Judaism, or the old rite and sect, and have converted others. He's saying that there's a possibility of pleading with her that she might reconsider, and reconsider not lightly. And here's Paul to Seneca and Lucilius. Lucilius. Who does that sound like? "Of the subject on which you have written, I must not speak with pen and ink, of which the former marks out and draws somewhat, and the latter shows it clearly, especially as I know that among you, that is, in your homes and in you, there are those who understand me. Honor is to be paid to all, and so much the more because men catch at opportunities of being offended." True. "If we are patient with them, we shall certainly overcome them at every point, provided they be men who can be sorry for their actions." This is a kind of a backhanded word to Nero, it sounds like to me. And of course, the word men in here, this being written in Latin, that would just mean people. From Seneca to Paul and Theophilus. So we had Lucilius before. Lucilius is with Seneca, and Theophilus is with Paul. Who's Theophilus? Well, we have some clues as to who he is. The one that makes the most sense, it's an anagram of the name Theophilus, Titus, Flavius, Sabina. Look him up, you'll be surprised who he is. Theo, Titus, Phil, Flavius, and Sabinus. I profess myself well content with the reading of your letters, which you have sent to the Galatians, Corinthians, and Achaeans. And may we so live together as you show yourself to be inspired with a divine frenzy. For it is the Holy Spirit, which is in you and high above you, which expresses these exalted and adorable thoughts. I would therefore have you careful of other points, that the polish of the style may not be wanting to the majesty of thought. And brother, not to conceal anything from you, and have it on my conscience, I confess to you that the Augustus was moved by your views. When I read to him the beginning of the virtue that is in you, perhaps he meant your exordium about virtue, his words were these, that he could wonder that a man not regularly educated could think thus. The Augustus here, of course, is Nero. I replied that the gods often speak by the mouths of the simple, not of those who try deceitfully to show what they can do by their learning. And when I cited him the example of Vatienus, the rustic, to whom two men appeared in the territory of Riot, I don't know what that is, who afterward were recognized as Castor and Pollux, he appeared fully convinced. Farewell. So now he's read these letters to Nero, whom he says was moved by the views of the letters. I have no reason to doubt it. Here's the reply from Paul to Seneca. Greeting. Though I am aware that Caesar, even if he sometimes lapses, is a lover of our wonders, you will suffer yourself to be not wounded, but admonished. For I think that you took a very serious step in bringing to his notice a matter alien to his religion and training. For since he is a worshiper of the gods of the nations, I don't see why you thought you would wish him to know this matter, unless I'm to think that you did it out of excessive attachment to me. I beg you not to do so in the future. For you must be careful not to offend the Empress in your love for me. Yet her anger will not hurt if it lasts, nor do good if it does not. As a queen, she will not be angry. As a woman, she will be offended. Farewell. The conversations are turning a little bit here. Excuse me. Seneca to Paul. I know that you're not much disturbed on your own account by my letter to you on the showing of your letters to Caesar, as by the nature of things, which so calls away the minds of men from all right learning and conduct, so that I'm not surprised, for I have learned this for certainty by many examples. Let us then act differently. And if in the past anything has been done carelessly, you will pardon it. I sent you a book on elegance of expression. Farewell, dearest Paul. You getting bored with this yet? I'm not going to quit. You got to hear the rest. To Seneca from Paul, greetings. Whenever I write to you and do not place my name after yours, I do a serious thing and one unbefitting my persuasion, that is his sect. For I ought, as I have often declared, to be all things to all men, and to observe in your person that which the Roman law has granted to the honor of the Senate, and choose the last place in writing, a letter, not striving to do as I please in a confused and disgraceful way. Farewell, most devoted of masters, given on the 5th of the calends of July. Nero, the 4th time, and Messala, consuls, AD 58. Seneca to Paul, greeting. My dearest Paul, if you, so great a man, so beloved in all ways, be, I say not joined, but intimately associated with me in my name, it will indeed be well with your Seneca. Since then, you are the summit and topmost peak of all people. Would you not have me glad that I am so near you as to be counted a second self of yours? Do not then think that you are unworthy to be named first on the heading of letters, lest you make me think you are testing me rather than playing with me, especially as you know yourself to be a Roman citizen. For the rank that is mine, I would it were yours, and yours I would were mine. Farewell. Given on the 10th of the calends of April, Epaphroditus and Capito, consuls, 59 AD. The next one comes 5 years later. Seneca to Paul. Hail, my dearest Paul. Think you that I am not in sadness and grief that your innocent people are so often condemned to suffer? Things are turning now. And next, that the whole people thinks you so callous and so prone to crime, that you are supposed to be the authors of every misfortune in the city. This is the year of the Great Fire, isn't it? 64, when Nero fiddles while he burns Rome, blames it on the Christians. Yet let us bear it patiently and content ourselves with what fortune brings until supreme happiness puts an end to our troubles. Former ages had to bear the Macedonian, Philip's son, that's Alexander, and Darius, Dionysius, and our own times endured Gaius Caesar, that's Caligula. To all of whom their will was law, the source of the many fires that Rome suffers plain. But if humble men could speak out what the reason is, and if it were possible to speak without risk in this dark time, all would be plain to all. Christians and Jews are commonly executed as contrivers of the fire. Whoever the criminal is, whose pleasure is that of a butcher, and who veils himself with a lie, he is reserved for his due season. And as the man, best of men, is sacrificed, the one for the many, so he, vowed to death for all, will be burned with fire. So who's he talking about here without saying his name? He's talking about the Emperor Nero. He's veiled in a lie because he blamed this burning on someone else. He mentions the executions of Christians and Jews executed on account of the fire. And he calls Caesar the butcher, 64 AD. A little bit more to this letter. 132 houses and 4 blocks have been burnt in 6 days. The 7th brought a pause. I pray you may be well, brother, given the 5th of the calends of April, Frugi and Bassus consuls. Here's the last entries. Seneca to Paul, greeting. Much in every part of your works is enclosed in allegory and enigma, and therefore the great force that is given you of matter and talent should be beautified. I do not say with elegance of words, but with certain care. Nor should you fear what I remember you have often said, that many who affect such things vitiate the thought and emasculate the strength of the matter. But I wish you would yield to me the humor, and humor the genius of Latin, and give beauty to your noble words, that the great gift that has been granted to you may be worthily treated by you. Farewell. Paul to Seneca. I think this is the last one I have. I think there's a couple more. To your meditations have been revealed those things which the Godhead has granted a few. With confidence, therefore, I sow in a field already fertile and most prolific seed, not such matter as is liable to corruption, but the abiding word, an emanation from God who grows and abides forever. This your wisdom has attained, and you will see that it's unfailing, so as to judge that the laws of heathens and Israelites are to be shunned. You may become a new author by showing forth with graces of rhetoric the unblameable wisdom of Yeshua Christos, which you, having well nigh attained it, will instill into the temporal monarch, his servants, and his intimate friends. Yet the persuading of them will be rough and difficult task, for many of them will hardly incline to your admonitions. Yet the word of God, if it be instilled into them, will be a vital gain, producing a new man, incorrupt, and an everlasting soul that shall hasten from hence to God. Farewell, Seneca, most dear to me. Well, it was a hearty farewell because it was at this time that Seneca had to do away with himself. We probably need to figure in the book of the Acts of the Apostles when exactly, in chronological order, did that book end? This looks to me like there is a very close association, of course, with Paul and Seneca. It doesn't actually say that they met or that Paul came before Caesar, but between some of these letters are years. And it almost seems like they seem so fond of themselves that wouldn't they get together? There's a letter missing out of this, I think. This sounds so believable to me. And the dating on it is so believable. And why, if it was apocryphal or it was a forgery, why would it go on so long with such pleasantries? That's the question I might have. In other false writings, the writer gets right down to the imitation of whoever he's forging, gets right down to messages. But here, there's a lackadaisical kind of attitude that is in no hurry, and it almost seems like the sentiment they have together is so casual that this is not the writing of a false writer. I think it would be a better idea for those that consider these letters to be forgeries or false to tell us why they think so. All right, to end up now, we go one more place in the scripture. And we'll take this up tomorrow again, if you can stand any more of it. if you have a scripture there, you want to look this up. Paul writes a letter to the Romans. And this letter was undoubtedly in the hands of Seneca and Nero. And if you're looking at it now, just look down into it. Look at the names. We have at least one senator here. That is Rufus. He's mentioned again in 2 Timothy 4. That would be Rufus Pudens, who is supposedly Paul's brother, but that's not the way I see it, where it says in 13, and his mother, who has been a mother to me too. I think it's just a saying, kind saying. Rufus Pudens was a senator who worked in England with General Vespasian in the time of Claudius, when Claudius again took over Britain. Rufus Pudens married a British Druid princess, who is also mentioned in 2 Timothy 4 as Claudia. So in 2 Timothy, he greets Claudia and Rufus, husband and wife. Rufus took this daughter, whose title was originally Gladys, renamed by Claudius himself to Claudia because he fell in love with her. And she's the granddaughter of King Bran of Siluria and the daughter of Viragus. I hope I got that right. The prince that was the head of the armies of Siluria that fought against Claudius and Vespasian and the rest of them in Britain and almost won. That's another story. I'm going to leave that for tomorrow. But as you look down here, you don't see one Jewish name, with the possible exception of Mary. Of course, in Greek, what this is written in, it's Maria, which is also a Greek name. I'm thinking if Seneca, who knew full well, according to the letter, that Nero burned Rome down, if he was pleading for his life, and even if he wasn't, he's got to have something to do with Nero's blaming Christians for the burning. It wasn't that well known of a sect at that time at all. Only a second generation. We're just getting started. The Jews in Rome lived in with the Christians. They were just considered, all of them considered Jews. But suppose Nero had a hold of this letter to the Romans, given by Seneca or read by Seneca. What does he have here? He's not only blaming the Christians for burning Rome, but he's got a handmade list of people here to go get. Follow me? he's got a list of people to start out with, to get and persecute. And you know, in Rome, what they did with these people, they picked them up, made them human torches, used them for entertainment by burning them alive, used them for street lights, put them before beasts, crucified them every way, tortured them, cut their limbs off, left them alive. Horrible things, because they were Rome burners. It wasn't until that whole idea was turned around that it stopped. But it went on all over the Roman world, and we have evidence to that because of who John the Revelator is writing about, who includes a caricature of Messalina, the whore of Babylon, along in his writings. He's writing about the Roman war. Where does Nero start? Now, it's my contention that Nero started with this list and began to work from this list out. He turned the list over to the praetorians, and said, find them, get them in here, let's have our scapegoat. And if that's the case, then Paul, that would make Paul the perhaps unwitting, perhaps one of the unwitting originators of the Neronic persecutions to which he escaped, of which he escaped. Is anybody left? Yeah, a few people left. I'd sure like to see if there's any comments, and I'll leave you then. Oh. So confused, Liz McGee. Is Paul Saulos Thaddeus Alexander Herod? Yeah, you can look him up in the genealogy at genie.com. No, this is never heard of. It's a matter of digging through to find it. I started liking this Roman history and started listening to it. I didn't know there was any such thing as preterism, and the whole thing just started coming together for me. I didn't disconnect your audio. A soap opera? Sure. This is just a small part of it. Pick up Suetonius, The 12 Caesars. You'll laugh your head off. It's got to be comedy. Yes. The usual suspects, and there they are. All right. Thank you so much for tarrying with me tonight. As Moses said, I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. I'll catch you tomorrow if you want to come back. Thank you so much for coming. Shabbat Shalom.